Welcome to Healing the Spirit, a space where we awaken our creativity, deepen our connections, and remember who we are through the lens of astrology, archetypes, and art making. I'm your host, Jonathan Coe. Hello everyone, welcome to Healing the Spirit. In this episode, I invited astrologer and healer Martha Alter Hines to discuss the overlaps and the distinctions between mental health support and spiritual support. This is a juicy question. I've heard it a lot since I began my journey as a practitioner, and I've even asked this question myself as someone who tends to my own spiritual well-being and my own mental health. I invited Martha to have this conversation with me because for 20 years, Martha worked as a clinical social worker, psychotherapist, and body worker prior to answering her soul's calling to offer spiritual guidance using energy work and astrology. And so I knew that Martha would have really interesting takes on this question. It's obviously a complex question because there are many different types of spiritual support. There are many different modalities, and each practitioner of spiritual modalities tend to have their own unique lens. And the same is true of mental health practitioners. And so in this episode, we get to hear some of Martha's thoughts based on her unique experiences. All right, let's get to it. Hi, Martha. Welcome to the podcast. It's so good to have you back again.
So good to be here, always.
Yeah. I think this is our third conversation together on the podcast. So very excited to have you back. Thank you for being here. And like I mentioned, you've been on the podcast before. Folks can listen to our other conversations, but I want to give you a little bit of space for you to talk about who you are and a little bit about what you do and any experiences that you want to share here at the front as a brief introduction to everyone.
Sure. Well, as we were saying before we got on the call, I feel like a different person from 2 weeks ago or something when we last talked. So when you're asking me that, when you're asking me that question, I'm going, wait, who am I? Well, just on the surface level, at least. I mean, so I'm an astrologer. I worked for a very long time as a clinical social worker and a psychotherapist in the child welfare system, especially. So I worked with kids and families who were in a lot of trauma and crisis. That's the big portion of my adult life doing that. And then let's see, 5 years ago, I officially left social work and launched into what I do now, which is a combination of certainly based on or bringing in a lot of those skills and that background, but bringing in astrology and channeling and really holding space for this time of collective, you could call it great remembering of who we really are on the ultimate level of source and ourselves as earth and ourselves as cosmos, and holding space for us to come back into the wholeness of who we are. Many, many levels. And there's lots of other things I'm sure I could say, but I think that sums it up.
Yeah. Thank you for bringing in the great remembering. That feels like a very accurate and resonant description for this time for me as well. So I just really appreciate you bringing that in. And it feels like that really sets the tone for this conversation, because the reason why I invited you and I wanted to have this conversation with you is because both of us shared experiences recently where, um, hmm, how do I phrase this? I feel like I became, and I would definitely love to hear your experience with this as well, as much as you want to share. But how it feels to me is I became aware of the ways in which this work is distinct from, meaning, quote unquote, spiritual work is distinct from mental health work, and also the ways that they overlap. And the first person that I thought about reaching out to was you, because I know you have such a wealth of experience in both of these arenas. And I perceive you as someone who navigate both of them um, in your very Virgo way with such care and thoughtfulness, and also a certain level of precision. And I think when we talk about precision, often people think about precision as being this cold thing, but I feel like you do it in a way that is so integrated and so human and so loving. And so, yeah, I just wanted to explore this topic with you of like, you know, as people who have a spiritual dimension to us, as people who also work with emotional and mental health related things, like how do we think about these things? How, especially as people listening maybe are thinking about getting support. I think that may be a good place to start for us, in terms of like receiving support. How would you conceptualize and begin to talk about the difference between receiving spiritual support and receiving mental health support?
Yeah. And this is something I've thought about a lot
Mm,
for obvious reasons. And I think I'm still developing my opinions or my answers on that.
mm,
And I would love your thoughts too. Um, so yeah, so when I was a psychotherapist, and to say really clearly, I'm not practicing as a psychotherapist right now.
mm,
Um, I have that background, I have those skills, but not what I'm doing. I did work with really, really, really intense stuff, really extreme, most extreme trauma that you can imagine in a lot of cases.
mm,
And I worked with people in extreme crisis and all of that. So, um, so I've noticed in my work now a process over especially the last year and a half or 2 years, of having to get over and over again, having to assess my boundaries and my intention
mm,
and what is mine to do and what is not mine to do. Even though I
mm,
could do a lot of different things, at this moment in my life, my sole directive is very clear and specific,
mhm,
and so um so I've even had to change things on my website to be to even again, so even though I have the background that I could name about the trauma work and all of that, I've had to get very clear about what is mine to do in this moment on a soul level, but also what is appropriate,
mm,
what needs can really be addressed care mm, safely
mm,
through the kinds of things I'm offering, and what cannot.
mhm.
And that's come through a little bit of trial and error. Yeah, so I'm being vague, but that's this, I guess, the beginning of my answer.
Mhm.
Do you want to you guide me on what would be the most helpful, or
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. I guess I love that, and I think the piece you said about boundaries and intention feel extremely important. And I'm imagining there may be folks listening too who are on the giving end of things, right? But maybe let's begin with on the receiving end of things, right? Like when
Mm,
you when you think about people coming to you now for spiritual support in all the multiplicity of perspectives and modalities that you bring into the table in terms of working one on one or even in groups with people. Um, do you see a difference in the needs of people coming to you now versus back then, right? When you were working as a social worker, clinical social worker, and as a psychotherapist? And also, where is the intersection and where is kind of the blurred line? I don't know if
Hmm.
does that question feel pointed or specific enough?
Yeah, and you step in and guide me if yes, yes. But
Yeah.
yeah, absolutely for sure. So so I think it's like a Venn diagram,
Hmm.
where there's certain things that are very clearly distinctly different and then there's obviously some overlap.
Mm.
Um the most gigantic difference in the work I used to do and the work I do now is that in the work I used to do, I didn't talk about spirituality almost at all, and most of my
Mm.
clients weren't really spiritually oriented, or if they were, certainly wouldn't be in the way in the way that I'm spiritually oriented. And so I didn't talk about it because I wasn't supposed to, and it wouldn't have been helpful for them.
Yeah.
So now, uh, close to 100% of the people who come to me are spiritually oriented. I don't know why they would come to me if they're not at this point,
True.
but yeah. Um, but in terms of their needs, I think there's the middle of the Venn diagram where of the needs do overlap because we all have trauma, we all have
Mm.
emotional struggles.
Mhm.
Um, and so my clients before had very extreme trauma and very extreme emotional needs. And then the people I work with now are on a spectrum of, stronger needs to maybe less intense needs.
Yeah.
And and I think the thing I've really sat with is in terms of the people I work with now who do have more intense needs, I've had to get really clear on what I'm offering now is
Mm.
appropriate to help them with, and
Mhm.
where 95% of the needs of somebody in a pretty extreme situation cannot be met by what I do now. Just
Mm.
the answer is no.
Yeah.
They really, really need to be working with a therapist
Yeah.
and or a psychiatrist and the mental health practitioners.
Mm.
um and then there's like sometimes I can figure out, okay, this little thing that I'm doing that maybe can augment that. Um but but for the most part I've started just being really clear up front and saying, actually, I think I would prefer that right when you're in this crisis mode, please go to you know mental health professional or whatever it is.
Mhm.
um But then when you get in the more of the gray area, like life is there's a struggle, but it's not an extreme crisis, then I
Mm.
start to feel like, okay, there's probably a little more I can do to help now. Um, and the very, very, very best, I mean, the very most appropriate, I would say, for what I do now is people who are um, going going through the life journey and having things arise, but they're really taking responsibility, and they're in a place where
Mm.
they can take a lot of self-responsibility for what their own journey is about. And they feel stuck or confused, but they're able to take their own actions, uh, and see me as an ally as opposed to
Mm.
see me as something that might save them, right? That's a key that I've learned the hard way of, that this spiritual work maybe could quote unquote save people, but it should not be approached that way. And
Yeah.
if a person is really feeling a need to be saved, um, probably they're in a pretty intense crisis.
Mm.
And it starts to feel a little dangerous to count on, something other than a licensed professional mental health professional, psychiatrist, et cetera, et cetera.
Mm.
Um, that's where the gray area gets really dicey for me.
Yeah.
And yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm curious if you feel comfortable sharing specific examples, not necessarily maybe from the perspective of your clients, but just in general, like what are some of the signs that we can tell, like if I'm listening to this podcast, right, and I'm listening to the two of us uh, in this conversation, and I'm trying to decide, like, should I get a therapist or should I go to Martha? um,
Yeah.
are there questions you would share with folks to kind of gauge their own ability to sense into that discernment? I mean, obviously, probably folks can reach out to you and be like, "Hey, can we like connect for 10 minutes? Can we see if we're a good fit?"
Hmm.
Right?
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, but yeah, I'm curious if you feel like there's something that people can go through on their own, like a series of questions that they can ask themselves
Yeah,
around
great.
this.
Yeah. Um, I think, well, something I've been thinking about a lot lately actually is just relevant probably just to astrologers and spiritual type people in general, not
Hmm.
only people who have background as therapists. So this maybe half answers your question, but it's on my mind. I think a lot of us who are astrologers or who are highly intuitive and use that intuition a lot, something I've noticed myself having to say to people a lot, a lot lately is I cannot predict anything about your life. And I cannot tell you, like people will say, well, when is something good going to happen? Right. Or when is,
Mm-hmm.
is that a bad thing? Does that mean something bad is going to happen? And I go, I have literally no idea. And if I tried to give you an answer, I'd probably be wrong. It's
Mm-hmm.
like, and, and it comes back to the taking responsibility thing. It's like, I feel like it gets so dicey just in the whole
Mm-hmm.
world of astrology
Yeah.
to to be in that position where people come and want answers, which is so understandable. We all want answers. But like if I'm looking at a chart, like I was looking at a chart yesterday and it's all like ingredients of a cake. I mean, you know this. Speaking to the choir here. But uh it's like, you have an egg and you have milk and you have flour and you have vanilla or something. Well, that could turn into an amazing cake.
Mm.
And it could also turn into, a mess on the floor. Like, I don't know. I can't know.
Yeah.
Um, you might be having a Venus Jupiter transit. Well, that looks probably pretty darn beautiful,
Mm-hmm.
but I don't know how that'll actually manifest. You could be having a Saturn transit,
Yeah.
and some people would get really freaked out about that. But Saturn, often I've seen in my own life, if I've been really in integrity, really consciously on my path, a Saturn transit turns out to be amazing, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And
Totally.
right. So I was saying to somebody yesterday, well, this person wanted to know when is something good going to happen or is something bad going to happen? And I said, well, it's really, really, I have no idea because it has so much to do with the choices you make,
Mm.
and so I think in general, if a person is in a place of wanting outside answers and not not so oriented to what can I do to
Mm-hmm.
help myself, that I get a little nervous about that kind of a person coming to me.
Yeah.
But if a person is in a place of, hey, I'm having these intuitive feelings about my own life. I'm getting my own kind of knowing in myself, and I would love a guide to help just just hold a little bit of space for me.
Mm-hmm.
Um, give me little a sense of like maybe some other possibilities of what I could be tapping into, and give
Mm.
me a bigger context for the energetics that might be going on, right? And I would love someone who can help me tap even more deeply into my own knowing of myself
Mm.
and the steps that I can take to really be on my path and like really clear, really aligned. That's my ideal client. I love working with people
Yes.
like that.
Yes.
Um, So fun. So good.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. I love this. I feel like um I'm glad we kind of zeroed in on astrology because
Mm.
I realize as you were talking too that like, this huge umbrella of like spiritual support is really quite large. Like there
Yeah.
are so many different kinds of spiritual support. So I'm really glad we're kind of landing in this astrology land because um what I feel like reflecting and maybe furthering reflecting back to you, Martha, and then like furthering some of your points is this idea of um, how astrology provides context, right? I've recently been thinking about this in terms of um, like an analogy. Like I think of our work almost like, you can say like a weather reporter. I don't really like
Mm.
that because I'm kind of like, oh, I'm not really a weather reporter. But I think about someone who's, I don't know if there's an actual job for this, but I'm really thinking about someone who's kind of like a topologist, someone who's able to kind of tell you, looking at a map, like the terrain here looks like this. Like there's a
Yes,
little
yes,
hill
yes.
here, there's
Mhm.
a little cliff here, there's a little valley here. And, or like this is, you might find yourself in the middle of an ocean, or you might find yourself in the middle of a lawn, and I feel like that question, right, of like when are good things going to come my way is so tricky because not only are good things dependent on the terrain or the landscape we find ourselves in, it also has to do with the level of resources that this person has and the
Yeah.
kind of resources that this person has. For
Yeah.
example, to go back to what you were saying earlier about Saturn, if all your life you've been building and rebuilding your relationship with discipline, healing some of your relationship with authority, making amends with different authority figures, or maybe even doing a lot of inner child healing work, really looking at your life with a sense of you being the author of your life. A lot of Saturnian transits are probably going to be extremely clarifying, right? Because you're like, well, this was not exactly a pleasant experience, but now I
Mhm.
know that this door is now closed. Like, I don't have
Yeah.
to spend a lot of energy trying to figure this out anymore because this career path or this relationship is now gone, right?
Mhm.
Thank goodness.
Mhm.
Like, there's that way of approaching things versus another way of approaching things would be like, I'm waiting for the universe essentially to give something like a nice place to land for me. But even what defines a nice place to land is very different person to person,
Mhm.
you know?
Mhm.
And I'm even thinking about like just even between you and I, in terms of our personal lives. You have two children, Martha. I don't have children. My definition of like, a nice Saturday would be probably very different than your definition of a nice
Mhm.
Saturday, and
Mhm.
that's just speaking very mundanely. And I think that's where astrology can be really helpful in describing something, right? But from that description, often there needs to be another level, which is really doing the work of figuring out, okay, now that I know the description, what am I going to do with this description? You
Yeah.
know, how can I make this useful for me, or is this useful for me at all? You know?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Totally agree. All of the above.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. Um, so I love that. I think where I'm wanting to kind of guide us next is in feeling into when it comes to this question, right? Of like, what's going to happen, or when are good things going to happen to me? Um, Essentially, when someone kind of thinks they need spiritual support, but maybe is kind of maybe looking for an answer, I'm wanting us to maybe spend a little bit of time here because I certainly, from my own practice, have some of my own frameworks and like hypotheses about this around like, why is this question coming up for people? Like what needs to be addressed here, and how can we, in our role as an astrologer, as an energy worker, how can we assist them? And where do we need to kind of be like, well, you need deeper and maybe more intense, more structured support around this. Um, because I think that even just like anxiety, right, is so interesting because really feeling into like, is my anxiety needing clinical support, or is this
Mm.
just needing someone to like talk, or am I just needing someone to talk to, or as you said earlier, right, when you said expanding the possibilities, I think sometimes I've been in a lot of situations where I'm feeling mentally anxious, but
Yeah.
I can tell I don't really need medication.
Yeah.
What I need is someone who is maybe more neutral than I am and can kind of talk about the different options with me,
Yeah.
you know?
Totally.
Um, yeah. Anything you want to add to that or what's coming up for you?
Yeah, I think, I mean, again, I don't think there's a black and white answer, but certain things are
Yeah.
black and white. Like, for
Mm,
example, if somebody's actively suicidal,
mhm.
please go see a mental health professional. Like, that's
Yeah.
really, really, really extreme, right? And really, the person really needs help now. Um, so that would be on one extreme end, where it's a very black and white to me.
Hmm.
Um, But yeah, in the middle there, I mean, another thing I've talked a lot about, I did a video with Heather Ensworth, who is an astrologer who's also a psychotherapist, and she's amazing. She and I are good friends, and we both have this background as trauma-informed therapists,
Hmm.
plus the astrology part, plus lots of spiritual stuff. So so she has actually a whole program that helps people incorporate, and I highly recommend it. She's written a book and she has a program that she does called the Arch program, where she takes a lot of her own experience and knowledge as a therapist, but then expands it way beyond, incorporates spirituality in ways of approaching trauma. Okay,
Mm,
so what one thing she and I have talked a lot about is the reality that in the traditional psychotherapeutic models, there's no room for spirituality. You are not supposed to talk about spirituality, period.
mm,
There's a little bit of sometimes acknowledgement of the body, like in somatic therapies.
mhm,
A therapist might suggest meditating or something, or like relaxation techniques, maybe. Uh,
mm,
but But for the most part, I would say if you're in that middle range of, let's say, feeling anxious,
mhm,
I would say and you're a spiritually oriented person, I think 80 to 90% of the time, going to a traditional therapist probably won't particularly help, or it might help a little bit. Speaking for myself, let me take myself.
mhm,
Um, I love therapy. I think therapy is great, obviously. And I do not see a therapist personally at this moment in my life,
mm,
because at least what I've found for myself is that when I have normal human anxieties, or, just things that go on in life, the things that definitely help me the most will not be done in traditional psychotherapy. So
mm,
cognitive behavioral therapy, there are little things that might help. Like, if you're feeling anxious about something or other, it often helps to think, what is the most catastrophic outcome of that situation? And like take yourself to that place, and then like, what's the worst scenario here? And then help yourself address that. And probably your anxiety will decrease, right? Like, that's something that a traditional psychotherapist might do. So sometimes I'll just do that in my own mind, in
mhm,
my own head for myself.
mm,
But the majority of the time, what's going to help me feel better, um, talking with a friend or being in nature, co-regulating with, literally, with the earth and with the cosmos. Traditional psychotherapies will not do that.
mhm,
Um, Looking at the astrology, um, just going for a walk, being by the beach. I live right by the ocean, so that's huge, huge, huge for me. Hugging my cat, spending time with my kids, just so many things that uh yeah, or praying. For me, praying and getting guidance and connection from the spirit world. That's probably actually that's the top one for me.
Mm,
Sometimes getting a hug. I mean, there's just
mhm,
so, this huge range of possibilities, and traditional psychotherapy, yeah, doesn't tend to think about the wisdom of the body. Sometimes, again, sometimes, it's not going to work with energy like
mhm,
Reiki would, or like craniosacral body therapies would. It's not going to talk about spirituality other than to say, like, well, if you bring up I have a relationship with God, maybe
mm,
the therapist would feel comfortable bouncing back and forth a little with that, but that's not what they're trained to do, and it's not really what their job is.
mm.
So for me, a lot of the time, in that if we're in that mid range of just kind of general anxiety kind of a feeling, yeah, 90% of the time, I think there's so much that can help way, way, way beyond traditional psychotherapy.
Yeah, yeah,
Does that answer your
yeah.
question?
I think so, Martha. I think you're also making me think about something that I feel is really important in terms of considering the idea of supporting ourselves in our own individual journeys, right?
Mhm.
Something I've been thinking a lot about is how part of being human and part of being alive is that we'll always encounter many problems and there are different solutions to different problems.
Yeah,
and
totally.
in a way, I think the heart of this conversation is around taking a step, taking a step back, or taking a bit of an extra moment to consider, what is my intention here? What is going on? What would be the outcome I would ideally like to happen, right? And what is my intention in getting support? Because what you're speaking to just now makes me think about, like, my intention for like hugging a cat or like being with a tree is very different than like even within that um extremely helpful and beautiful suite of options you just laid out. Like, talking to a friend would have a very different effect to me than being with a cat or going into nature, right?
Totally.
Right? Like,
Yeah.
sometimes, how many times, right? I'm just going to speak from the eye. How many times have I actually needed solitude and needed co-regulation with nature or with a body of water? And in my anxiety, I thought I needed to talk to a friend, and then actually talking makes it worse.
Yeah. 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 Totally. Hmm.
Yeah, yeah.
Yes.
So I think, like, getting really specific, and I wonder if this to you feels connected to what you were mentioning earlier about taking responsibility, because to me this feels like what taking responsibility is, which is recognizing that only I can really know what I'm experiencing,
Mhm.
and ultimately, only I can really know what I need in the moment, although sometimes I may need the co presence of another person to
Yeah,
reflect my state back to me so that I can then resource myself into knowing what I need at any given moment.
exactly. And I think it's so perfect that we're recording this on the day that the sun is entering Virgo. Like, because this feels so, so, so Virgo, like with both
Yes.
of us with our Virgo ascendants and my Virgo moon. And um, yeah, I mean, exactly. And then I'm also thinking of my own Jupiter in Taurus in my ninth house. Like, just so much of what I feel like I'm here to hold space for is coming back to our bodies, coming back to the wisdom
Hmm.
of and Hygeia on my ascendant conjunct my moon in Virgo too. So, like,
Hmm.
you know, our bodies know, our beings know, our souls know. And so also, as we were talking about before we started recording, I'm personally experiencing a certain thing in my life, related to the why I feel different from 2 weeks ago. And that situation is, on the one hand, like really, really beautiful. And in another way, I'm feeling a lot of emotional anxiety, like up and down feelings about it. And so I've been something I really, really value, it's extremely important to me personally, is having that sovereignty, that ability to go into the inner temple of me, my
Mm,
Virgo self, um, and to get very clear and discerning on, yeah, what is my need right this minute? Do I need to just lie here and pray? Do I need to take a walk? And do I need to go exercise? Do I need to like
mm,
get my body moving? Um, do I need a hug? Whatever it is. And for most of the last couple of weeks since this thing has been going on, I've mostly needed time to myself. Like I really
mm,
haven't talked about the situation with virtually anybody. And
mhm,
that's my body telling me, no, no, no. This you just need quiet. Like you need time for this to settle. But then you and I got on a call and you somehow intuitively like knew what was going on with me without me even saying anything. And then my heart response to that in my body, my body response was, oh, like such incredible relief, to be
mhm,
seen, like to be mirrored like that
mhm,
was amazingly helpful to me in that
mm,
moment, right?
mhm.
And maybe a week ago it wouldn't. I mean, I don't know. I can't speak for myself a week ago, but yeah, just to be able to be so clear and discerning and self-aware of our own needs.
Yeah,
Huge, 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 huge.
yeah, yeah,
Definitely.
yeah. First of all,
And I
I'm
yeah.
really, yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say, and I think that self-awareness on that body, energy body level is something for sure that we, as more the spiritually oriented practitioners, definitely, I think that's totally appropriate for us to be supporting people, helping them with that. I
Yeah,
love helping, supporting people with that's a huge, huge part of what I do in all of my
yeah,
work now.
yeah,
Yeah. What were you gonna
yeah,
say?
yeah. So much. I mean, first of all, I'm really glad to have been that presence for you. Thank you for trusting me enough to let yourself be seen and reflected back in that way. And also, something I've been thinking a lot about is how, for me, over the years of working with different practitioners and receiving support myself in kind of a spiritual sense, um, and again, that term, I feel like we need a new term for that
Mm,
because it feels so vast sometimes, and it's anyways, that maybe is a topic for another day, but it just feels like there's a lot of different ways to define it. But to kind of just generalize, what I've learned is I know when a specific working relationship is good for me in terms of receiving spiritual support, when I feel that a lot of space is opening up for me to have the clarity and the courage to be able to see myself. Like, in a way, I feel like the practitioner's job is to notice something, right? And then kind of have this ability relationally to be able to bring it up to the person in a way that feels sufficiently safe for them,
mm,
given the nature of the relationship the practitioner has with the person in front of them, given their specific skill sets and abilities, and also just like being a decent human being in general, like not being a dick, And
yeah,
and
that's
I
good.
think I think the side effect is like you know when the session is working well, when you almost feel full of your own energy, and sometimes
Mm,
that can be an uncomfortable experience as well, because in my own personal experience, there have been times where I bring something up to a practitioner that I have not wanted to see for myself for a long time.
wow.
And when we start to open that up, the way I conceptualize this is my own life force energy starts kind of flooding into my system, and a lot of fear and a lot of anxiety can come in because I'm
Wow.
like, what? Like, I'm not safe, right? And I think hopefully the combination between working with different practitioners, having people on your support team,
Mhm.
but also having done some level of educating, right, yourself, which you and I have also kind of been in this capacity of providing space for people to educate themselves, essentially, right? With these tools and these frameworks, that's where I think our education can be really, really helpful. Which is why, like, I feel like it's very important if you're on a, again, quote unquote, spiritual path to not only just rely on working with practitioners, but actually educating yourself. Like learning these tools, some of these tools yourself can be really helpful to facilitate your own process. Because in a way, I think, I have a teacher once who said, everybody has their own answers at their own time,
Mm, mm, mm.
and I think a lot of spiritual practitioners I've seen who work with a level of care and skill often hold that philosophy.
Mm. Totally.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
And
I
that
feel like,
actually
Mhm.
also, I was reflecting on something about that I think is key, that I think you're implying as you're talking, I'll just name it out loud, is and something you do so well, is part of why I feel so safe with you. Um, is that, like, for example, when we got on the call before we were recording, you didn't just like jump in and say, "Oh, you are this." you know? It was like you reflected something very, very, very simple to me that happened to be astoundingly accurate. um, but it felt so respectful and um like you were still your energy body was still way back from me, right? Like you gave me
Mhm.
lots and lots of space
Mm.
to either to say yes, or to say no, or to say, actually I don't want to engage with that, or yes I would like to engage with that, or I didn't feel imposed on in the slightest, right?
Mm.
Which is part of why I just immediately relax with you. I mean, I just
Mm.
do, I always have.
Mhm.
um and yeah, and I think that's a just an important thing to name. I think we all know that, but when we're in these roles where people do come to us for answers,
Mm.
it can be feel so tempting, or like even like pressure to have answers and to give answers
Mhm.
instead of, and sometimes we do have things that we can offer that are helpful, but I think so much of the time the knowing kind of has its ability to rise in its right timing when we step way back, actually, as opposed to step in. um and then there's this very delicate balance of
Mm.
the knowing when to step back and when to say the right thing at the right time, but with respect and honor of the
Mm.
person's own wisdom, right?
Mhm.
um so anyway, that's
Mhm.
something you do incredibly naturally and easily, and yeah, I think it goes without saying on one level, but I just felt like I wanted to say it anyway.
Mm. Yeah. Thank you, Martha. I feel the same way about you. I feel like you have this way of being and presence, even in different conversations with people that help people expand their perspective and like can help them feel safe, maybe going to places that feel a little bit edgy, but I never feel like there's an imposition. Yeah.
Hmm.
Hmm. Hmm.
Phew. I'm glad. Good.
Uh, I have a question for you. So earlier, something you said about taking responsibility really kind of caught my attention because this is something I think about a lot. I mean, maybe this is just us being Virgo risings. I think it's so funny, but I do think that this is a very nuanced concept, um, and I just want to yeah make space for us to talk a little bit more about this. Yeah, maybe beginning with hmm, in your own experience and in your own body, either as a practitioner or as someone walking their own spiritual path or as someone receiving support from others, how does taking responsibility feel like in your body?
Mm. That is a great question.
Hmm.
Wow. Um, well, again, it might be my Virgo rising and my Virgo moon on my Virgo ascendant. But the first image that comes up for sure is this inner temple.
Hmm.
Um, so like I've done this exercise, and actually I've led people in this a lot, where I find my actual, like, the temple that actually is me, right? And
Hmm.
go in there. Well, I have this image for me personally of being in a sort of magical woods and walking into a clearing in the woods, and then there's a path, like a magical path up
Hmm.
coming up to this temple. And for me, the image that comes up of my own personal temple is like a very beautiful tent,
Hmm.
like made of, I don't know what, like leather or something. And and then I'll go up to the door of the temple, open the door and walk inside. And then I've had a lot of experiences where it's like I just go in and I look around at the inside of that temple. And again, in my case, it like the inside of the walls of the temple are embroidered, like
Hmm.
very intricately, lovingly, carefully embroidered. And there's carpets on the floor, really soft, and maybe a bed, sort of mattress on the floor. and and again, in my case, the roof is sort of like a teepee, kind of a tent,
Hmm.
and through the top I can see the sky. So if it's daytime, I can see the blue sky, and if it's night, I can see the stars or the moon. And and then I'll just lie there, like I'll lie on the floor in that temple and just feel it. And then I'll start to feel the beings of the woods around me, like fairies and gnomes and various animals and the plants and the earth, like the dirt itself. And sometimes spirit guides will come either around the temple or sometimes occasionally come inside. Sometimes there's a woman in there who her role is to clean the inside of
Hmm.
the temple, like continually just be maintaining it. It's so
Hmm.
Virgo, so
Hmm.
Virgo. um, yeah, and so as I've cultivated that feeling in my body, yeah, it's just more and more and more strong. I can feel it, like so you and I both not only the Virgo rising, but I have the Virgo moon, and then we both have the Pisces sun in our seventh
Hmm.
house, right?
Yeah.
And so I've often thought about this balance for me of the Pisces Virgo thing, where the my Pisces self, I also have Mercury in Pisces, so my
Me
Piscean
too.
self is,
Hmm.
oh yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and can is so wide open and empathetic and
Hmm.
can connect with people, on such powerful levels. My Venus also is in Aries in my eighth house, so I can go deep, 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 right?
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
and I want to go deep, and I want to connect really intimately with others. And then my Virgo self will go, "Oh, I need a minute." And I'll go straight back into my personal temple, and I need some space. I need some time
Hmm.
here. I need to
Hmm.
retreat for a little while.
Yeah.
Um, and over time, I'm getting better I would say I'm 90% there at this point, but it's always a process
Hmm.
of knowing how to do that dance, that like I'll open myself, which is amazing and great, and I love doing it. And then either I just need to recharge,
Hmm.
or if I've really opened myself, then I sometimes can get pretty freaked, get scared, like, oh my, wow, I've been so vulnerable here. Hang on a
Hmm.
second. And then
Hmm.
I'll, run back to my Virgo temple.
Yeah.
Um, and so I'm playing with the dance of being both like open
Hmm.
and also and having my Virgo temple as as a recharging station and as a retreat, but I've been trying really hard also not to use it as an escape.
Mm.
So, anyway, that's a whole conversation, but
Mm-hmm.
yeah, that in terms of what do I feel in my body, I think that it's that temple.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. What I'm hearing from you is a sense of internal navigation system. Like it's
Hmm.
almost like this temple for you is kind of like your GPS. You can
Yes.
tell, right? Like, am I in the right direction here? What do I need? And it's a place of resourcing um and sovereignty, but not in a way that like separates, but
Yes.
rather like really sensing into like, what do I need in this moment? Or
Yeah.
do I need anything? Or can I just hang out here? Mm-hmm. I love that.
And I can add one thing. Actually, this is really helping me clarify.
Great.
See myself. You're very good at mirroring me. Wow. Um, maybe this would resonate for other people too. So a lot of people ask me, "How do you know? How do you know? How do you know? How do you know
Mm-hmm.
things?"
Mm-hmm.
Because at this point in my life, as I think I pray every morning, and I get shown at the end of my prayers every single day. I say, "I am highest quantum source light, what is mine to do?" And then I get shown by the spirit world whatever it is I'm supposed to do that day or in general. And that's how I live my life. So, and it's very clear, very, very, very clear, moment by moment, usually, what is right for me and what's not right for me. And the big vision of, what courses am I supposed to hold next year? Or
Mm.
what meeting should I go to this week? Or, should I invite so and so to do this? Um, so so I have this very powerful, very clear way of relating to that kind of messages from the spirit
Mm.
world and from myself.
Mhm.
And people ask me all the time, how do you do that?
Mhm.
so um so now actually I've developed, just this past month, I have a whole free series if anybody's interested, that's all about that.
Mhm.
Um and I can give you the link if people want to
Yes.
sign up
What
for
is
that
it
for
called,
free.
Martha?
It's called the
Okay.
Wholeness Way series, and it's a
Mhm.
4-week free series. But week 2 is about finding your own spirit team, and week
Mm.
3 is about finding what is mine to do. So,
Mm.
like, yeah. Anyway,
Beautiful.
yeah. But one of the components for me personally that's really been hard to articulate, but you just said it. You just said it. Is this It's true for me, my body is my GPS system. That's literally exactly right.
Yeah. Yeah.
I've never been able to articulate it like that. It's like, so I'll be thinking, for example, um, let's see. For example, I periodically hold free events, and I held 2 free events this past spring, and I had a client say to me, well, can't you just do another one in June or whatever it was?
Mm.
And my body, it wasn't my brain, it was my body, just got an immediate nope. Nope,
Mm.
don't do that.
Mhm.
Do not do that. Bad
Mhm.
idea.
Mhm.
And so I said to her, well, my body is saying no. And she
Mm.
was a little flustered, like, well, but logically that would be but I want you to, you know? And I was like, well, my body's saying no. And I've learned the
Mm.
hard way, I cannot ignore that.
Yes.
There's something my body knows that my
Mhm.
brain doesn't know right this second.
Mm.
And it's a non-negotiable. My answer is
Yeah.
no.
Yeah.
So, um, yeah, and then things did develop this summer where I was like, wow,
Mm.
whoa, okay. I thought I was gonna have like a whole month free. That did not happen. you know, and things just arose that were great. But
Yeah.
if I had planned something, then it would have been I would have been really overwhelmed. But my
Mhm.
body knew. Somehow my
Mhm.
body knew.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. This is how I conceptualize this experience, Martha, because I've also experienced it myself, and I'd be really curious to hear your take on this. But I think one of the most potent benefits of having consistent spiritual practice and to have a spiritual framework, however you define that, right, is that you begin to learn what it means to have harmony between your spirit, your mind, your heart, and your body.
Oh.
And it's like it's music. It's
Oh.
basically music. The way
Oh.
I think about it is literally music, because it's like you as yourself, and I'm really talking about it from the perspective of the Jungian um capital S self here, right? Like you,
Mhm.
the self, or like the higher self, is kind of doing this really fine-tuned process of orchestrating the different elements and the different instruments so that they're keyed into one another. And that
Yes.
process of attunement, at some point, Martha, it stops becoming relevant. Like it can be your body telling you, it can be your heart telling you, it can be your mind telling you. Like sometimes I get stories in my mind of like, this person's not a good person, which may not mean that this person's a bad person, but it just might mean like I don't have resonance with this person, or this following this person is going to take me away from what, again, like my spirit knows is the path that I'm supposed to take. But at this moment, my brain hasn't caught up with my spirit yet, because
Yes.
evidence hasn't come in. Because what you're talking about is, to me, it feels like this phenomenon of the body being so keyed in with the spirit that the body just kind of tells you, like, nope, even though relationally, it would probably behoove you to tell this client, like, yeah, of course, I'll do it, you know?
Yeah.
But then you just know, and then the value of having this regular practice that I know you're engaged in constantly is you feel no, like there's not even a war anymore. And I
Mm.
love how in that example, Martha, you were communicating so clearly and so honestly with this person of like, my body says no. You know, it's not
Mm.
even like I don't want to, or that doesn't feel right to me. Like you were able to have this phrasing, which is so honest. And I think honesty always creates true relationality, right?
Mhm.
Even
Mhm.
if the person didn't like the answer,
Mhm.
they could feel the frequency of your truth, and they're probably like, oh, yeah, okay,
Mhm.
okay, I get it,
Mhm.
you know? Hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and you're helping me click with something else here also, in terms of the distinction between psychotherapy, traditional psychotherapy, and more of the stuff we do, the spaces we hold now.
Mm-hmm.
Again, so psychotherapy is really typically focused on research based therapies, which, you, in order to be able to quote unquote prove through research that something works, it has to be measurable somehow. So it's usually the cognitive behaviorally oriented therapies that are thought of in the psychotherapeutic world as research supported, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And so what they're focusing on there is your mind and the actions you're taking.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so again, that has its place. It absolutely can do some great things, but it is not going to acknowledge the spirit. It's barely going to acknowledge the body. So it is definite, and it acknowledges the heart, but I would say 50%, but it mostly focuses on the mind and the thoughts
Mm-hmm.
and then the behaviors. So it is definitely not going to be a support, at least not directly, in terms of exactly what you just said, the finding that music of the dance, of the integration of the whole being, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's what I'm really, really here to do. And I think probably you in your own way and lots of us in our own way, um, that I don't have, like, I can't use those parts of myself consciously or overtly if I'm a psychotherapist. And so it's like a disservice to my
Mm-hmm.
clients, it's a disservice to my sole purpose, really. But that's the key. I think, right, if to go back to one of your earlier questions, if a person is in a time and a place in their life where getting support to click into the integration of that song, of all those parts of ourselves, like that beautiful music that's our soul song, essentially, that's what I'm here to support people with. And if they're in a time where that's just way beyond, because they're in a crisis, super, super crisis, and they need that cognitive behavioral medicine kind of more support, then great, go to the psychiatrist and go to the therapist. Versus if you're in a time where it's like, wait a minute, no, I have this sort of inkling of connection with my spirit world and my body and my heart and my mind, and I want to integrate it all as one, and I want support in that. Yes, then come
Yeah.
to me, come to Jonathan. Yes, 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 perfect. Yay, let's do it.
Yes. Yes,
Yeah,
exactly.
so good.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Thank you. Hmm. I want to wind us to a close here, but I'm curious if you have any final words you want to share with folks, yeah, on the subject before we talk about any offerings you might have and how people can find you.
No, that suddenly, like, you're just helping me reflect and really sum it up. There we go. I mean, that was to me, that really summed up the whole point
Yeah.
of what we've been talking about.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
I
thank you
love the
for
way you put
naming
that.
that. Hmm.
Mm.
I feel like you, yeah, you reflected it back so beautifully too. Hmm. And I
Mm.
definitely see that as a running theme in a lot of my work, where I feel like a lot of people come for quote unquote spiritual support because there's a disconnect between one of the faculties, you know? And
Wow.
so I'm very, this is, I hope I'm not like just jumping in and like taking the spotlight here, but
No, no, no,
what
no, not at all.
I have a beef, Martha, with spiritual teachings that try to alienate one of the faculties. Because to me,
Oh,
that's replicating a lot of the prevalent mindset in the overculture, right?
yeah.
And I'm talking about specifically the overculture of Western rational thinking, right? Scientific materialist worldview,
Mhm.
scientism, colonialism, capitalism, like all those isms that we like to talk about here in the West, right?
Yeah.
The way that the overculture in the West talks about things is here are the different separate faculties,
Yeah.
right? And
Exactly.
each of them has a container. If you are at school, leave your heart behind, right?
Yeah.
If you are talking to your therapist, I don't know, don't bring your spirituality
Mhm, mhm,
or
mhm,
something
mhm,
like that, right? Like there's
mhm.
compartmentalization. And I think part of the beauty of doing spiritual work is actually in, you know, like for example, if someone's kind of stuck in a way of thinking that doesn't serve them, maybe really questioning like, are you asking the relevant questions? Like this is one of my favorite tools right now, like in my practice, where it's not about, you know, like, oh, that's just your thinking mind or that's just your ego, stop thinking, right? Just surrender.
Mm,
Like that to me is
mm,
actually kind of, there's something that never sits right, you know, especially
mm,
being such a mercurial person. Like my brain's gonna think anyway. Like, do you think that
mhm,
you saying that I'm supposed to surrender is gonna help?
mhm.
Like to
Yeah,
me this doesn't
totally.
help. Like what I've often found to be helpful, you know, in working with different colleagues or mentors is people have helped me clarify my questions or reroute me into the question that actually is relevant to me, right? And
Beautiful.
this, I think, is kind of tying us back to your introduction, which is around, I think a lot of us who seek this kind of support wants to listen to our spirit knowing, to our soul knowing.
Mhm.
And we're trying to figure out how can I align that? How can I harmonize that with my mind, with my body, with my heart, right? And yeah, trying to find a way that feels mm, reachable and doable
Mhm.
and safe and fun, you know?
Yeah. Yeah,
Hmm.
exactly. I think that really also sums it up, that we have been trained to separate out those parts of ourselves. And that's part of that, quote unquote, time of forgetting.
Hmm.
And now we're in this time of great remembering, like I was mentioning at the beginning. And for me, that the time of great remembering is really translation. Is
Hmm.
that we are whole beings,
Hmm.
and we need to basically be retrained or given support to recognize the wholeness that we are, which is what that wholeness series, the Free Wholeness Way series, is all about.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, exactly. Right. That
Hmm.
our brains are great. We need our brains. We need our
Yeah.
minds. It's
Hmm.
like
Hmm.
extremely helpful.
Yeah.
My own Mars in Aquarius in my sixth house loves my mind. you know, my just yeah, my Virgo rising loves my mind.
Uh-huh.
Um, I love, love, love learning about astronomy and like the details of the science of the blah blah. And then I love talking, calculus with my 17-year-old and like the minutia of all that. I mean, it's awesome.
Yes.
It all goes together. There's no separation,
Yeah.
right? Quantum
Yeah.
physics, like, oh, I love that stuff. Um, so yeah, I mean, right, like none of it, we should not be anyway. I think we're on the same page. Like we're whole beings, we're whole selves, and
Mhm.
that's what I'm here to hold space for is exactly that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Loving all of who we are and being all of who we are.
Hmm.
Hmm.
Thank you, Martha. So incredible. I really encourage everyone to check out your Wholeness Way series. That sounds incredible. Um, and yeah, I'm curious if there's anything else you have coming up, or yeah, I know you have a YouTube channel. If you can maybe share some of that info. I'll
Yeah,
also have it in the
sure.
show notes, obviously.
Yeah, the big, big, big thing. I would love for you to subscribe to my YouTube channel if that calls to you. Definitely. The Wholeness Way series is totally free, available indefinitely. Definitely sign up for that. I always have things I'm offering. I mean, I'm depending on when this is coming out. This fall, I'll have an eclipse workshop and another workshop I'm going to be offering in November. But then in 2025, I'm going to be offering two main things. One is this year, I've for the first time held an what's called Infinite Soul Wisdom Astrology 101 course. So I'll be starting the second go round of that in February of 2025.
Hmm.
And then also in 2025, which I'm super excited about, if anybody is interested in stars, I'm going to be holding a year-long star course starting probably in
Mm.
April of 2025.
Mhm.
And that is going to be really about actually this, like integrating both the mental part, like learning the astronomy, what are the actual scientific life cycle of a star, what is a star, like for real, like on a scientific level, what is it? But then weaving in the mythology and the astrology of various constellations and having our own personal relationship with certain parts of the sky. So we're going to basically be going through the year, focusing on the constellations and the parts of the sky that are visible in the evening,
Mm.
like rising in the evening in throughout the year.
Mm.
And yeah, lots more, but that's coming up. That's probably the biggest thing I'm really excited about for 2025. And I do sessions and there's always stuff.
Mhm. Yes,
Yeah.
that's so exciting. Amazing. Okay, I definitely encourage people to check you out, and your newsletter is such a great way to keep connected with you
Yeah, yeah.
as
It's my
well.
website,
Hmm.
livingtheonelight.com. Yeah, yeah. Mhm.
Yeah. All right. Thank you, Martha. Thank you so
Okay.
much for having this conversation with me. I could not have, I really am at this moment, I'm like, oh, thank goodness for my intuition because I knew you would be the right person to talk to. This is such
Oh,
a nourishing and incredible conversation. I really appreciate you.
well, I just always love connecting with you and I love you. You're
I love
such
you
a
too.
beautiful being and I'm so grateful for you being in my life and grateful for the spaces you hold and everything you give to the world and thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you.